Hello, my name is Urusha Salazar, and this article focuses on the study of bulimia. Bulimia is a widely known eating disorder that many young adults can come to experience in their lifetime. People believe that bulimia is just an extension of anorexia, which is another eating disorder. And because there has been an increase of prevalence and changes within the symptoms of bulimia, people can think that it's a new disorder, but in reality, we can trace bulimia back many years. Treatment has been offered by many different writers in earlier times. And although the concept of bulimia has been through many changes, there's been new symptoms coming up, the main concept of bulimia has stayed the same. Bulimia can lead to serious health issues, and some of these health issues can become permanent. So for example, some different complications that can come from bulimia are dental complications, digestive system complications, cardiovascular complications, and even sometimes dermatological complications. An example of a disease that can come from bulimia that is a very serious disease is esophageal cancer. And although eating disorders don't seem as common, they do represent a public health concern just because they are linked with other physical and psychological disabilities such as anxiety, depression, and sometimes, well, most of the time, these impediments go untreated. Next, we're going to review the participant information. And this article focused on the study of people who have gone through the eating disorder of bulimia. They gathered women from different communities. Mostly, they focused on women located in 5 different Midwestern sites. And they gathered these women through community advertising and local clinics. And they compared 2 different types of groups of women, one who had a history of anorexia while the others didn't, and they all had bulimia. The age range that they gathered also went from 18 to 55, with the mean age range being 25 years old. The name of this journal is International Journal of Eating Disorders, and the title of the study is called Revisiting Differences in Individuals with Bulimia Nervosa with and Without a History of Anorexia Nervosa, Eating Pathology, Personality, and Maltreatment. The authors are listed below. The goal of this study is to revisit the ideology of bulimia and its concepts. Earlier studies of bulimia found that there are more similarities to anorexia than differences, but recent research shows that we actually need to revisit this concept. And one reason is because of the limitations that there used to be when we first started studying bulimia. Some of the factors that the authors of this article focus on are differences between women with bulimia that have had a history of anorexia and haven't had a history of anorexia in their past, regarding behavior, personality, and childhood mistreatment. Now, when we look at the triangle of human ecology of design, we can see that all of these factors can go into different vertexes. So, for example, child mistreatment can belong to the vertex of habitat and behavior. The childhood they endured and the treatment they endured during their childhood depends on their social habitat and in the social organizations they lived in. Their personality belongs to the vertex of behavior. How they act and who they are can totally determine whether they develop eating disorders and why. It can also belong to the population because the people they are surrounded with can influence their personalities and their association to eating disorders. And their eating behavior belongs to the behavior vertex because it's how they behave around food. This study is a cohort study. More specifically, it's a cohort concurrent study. And a cohort study was used because the authors studied 2 different types of people, 2 different groups. One group has exposure to anorexia in their past and bulimia, and while the other group only has symptoms of bulimia. So what they do is they study to see if this exposure to anorexia in their past and have bulimia is just an extension of that. Participants that were interested in this research project contacted research personnel by telephone where they gave their verbal consent, and then they went through a diagnostic phone screening by trained interviewers. Participants that were considered eligible were then scheduled to come in for an in-person assessment where they gave their written consent and completed a set of questionnaires. One questionnaire was to assess the eating disorder symptomatology of that participant, and that was assessed with the EDQ version 4, which stands for Eating Disorder Examination Questionnaire. Another questionnaire was called the Childhood Trauma Questionnaire, which assessed the factor of maltreatment. The next one was Barrett Impulsivity Scale, which assessed the factor of impulsivity. And the last one was Frost Multidimensional Perfectionism Scale, which assessed the factor of perfectionism. Both groups of exposed and non-exposed were compared on demographic variables using t-tests for continuous measures and chi-square. A multivariate analysis of variances, which can be also said as MANOVA, was performed for binge eating and for bulimic behaviors. MANOVAs were also performed for the 2 MPS subscales that assess the factor of perfectionism, 3 BIS subscales, which assess the factor of impulsivity, and the 5 CTQ subscales, which assess the factor of childhood maltreatment. This chart represents characteristics of an individual and its connection to a history of anorexia. And the chart basically indicates that the groups were very similar apart from their BMI level, where the bulimia anorexia group was significantly lower than the group that was just showing symptoms of bulimia. This table represents the comparison and significance of women who have a history of anorexia and women who do not, with their association to bulimia. And the group of bulimia and anorexia showed higher levels of maltreatment, primarily physical abuse, even though there were some different types of abuses, primarily it was physical abuse, than those with no history of anorexia. So this study comes up with different conclusions. One of those conclusions was that by using different techniques and studies that were developed and are now well established, this study makes new contributions and comes up with new ideas to understand the potential connection between someone having a history of anorexia and someone with symptoms of bulimia. These findings also revealed that women with bulimia differed in their levels of current eating behaviors than those with a history of anorexia, because the women with a history of anorexia showed to have higher levels of restraint within their diet and purging. The findings of the eating pathology branch support the idea that behavioral features of anorexia may persist at a more elevated levels for individuals with both bulimia and anorexia than those with just bulimia but no history of anorexia. And a significant group difference also emerged for childhood maltreatment, where those with a history of anorexia reported higher levels of all types of neglect and abuse within their childhood. So when we look at the findings for perfectionism and impulsivity, there were actually no personality differences between people with bulimia and a history of anorexia and people with bulimia and no history of anorexia. So we're going to go ahead and look at the limitations that came up within this study. And a limitation could be the fact that the study relied completely on self-reported information, such as self-reported weight, height, and information on the participant. Another limitation is that the sample of people collected was not very diverse in the sense of regarding race, ethnicity, and education. All of those were very similar. Another limitation noted that they used a fairly large sample, but these authors suggested that the next time that this is studied, there should be a larger group of people who have bulimia and a history of anorexia as well. And even though the Childhood Trauma Questionnaire is a well-established way to measure maltreatment, it doesn't include the ages that the maltreatment actually happened, which could be really relevant in understanding connections with eating pathology. And one other possible limitation to consider could be that everyone a part of this study can have different interpretations of what a large portion of food may or may not be, or other factors taken into account. Below are the 2 websites and sources that I used for my study.